Funerals in Victorian London weren't quiet goodbyes. They were theatre, and the Undertaker was the director. And if they didn't make you famous, they made him rich. Step into his world. The front is a showroom, hushed, gleaming. Grief itself, curated into objects for sale. Glass cases glitter with mourning jewellery. Jet beads catching what little light slips past heavy drapes. Lockets lie open, waiting for a curl of hair. Black enamel rings whisper permanence from velvet trays. Shelves sag with lace gloves, veils, armbands, costumes for grief. Even men's mourning suits stand pressed and sombre. Rentable dignity for a few shillings. Families wander in with red eyes and trembling hands. The Undertaker meets them with practiced calm. Not too flashy, not too plain. He reads their station in seconds. Every glove, every ribbon, every veil. Not just signs of mourning, stagecraft. Because in Victorian London, sorrow was performed, and the Undertaker stood at the centre of the stage. But the showroom was just the surface. Step past the velvet curtains, the air changes. Sawdust hangs thick on the tongue. Varnish stings the nose. Hammer strikes echo in rhythm. Brass fittings clatter to the floor. The room vibrates with industry. Apprentices saw through mahogany planks, blades rasping steady as a clock. Others sand until the wood gleams like dark glass. Workers polish brass handles. They set them so they catch the light like coins in a banker's hand. A foreman inspects each one with cold precision. Every hinge, every seam, every nail. Not just mechanics, but reputation. Because a coffin was more than wood. It was a family's pride, measured in polish and symmetry. Apprentices learn this lesson the slow way. 5 years sweeping floors before they're trusted with a saw. 10 before polishing a coffin destined for a wealthy merchant. To shape a box for such a client was pride. Your name unspoken. Your work paraded through the streets for all to see. Step farther, and the scent shifts again. Hay, leather, sweat. In the stables, black horses stamp and snort. Their coats brushed until they gleam like glass. Harnesses trimmed with silver fittings hang on the wall, polished brighter than church candlesticks. Grooms test every strap, every buckle, for shine and soundness. On the highest shelf, ostrich plumes, imported at a great cost, are lowered like treasure. Fixed to the horses' heads, they transform them into creatures of spectacle. Their nodding feathers as unmistakable as a royal procession. And what did all this spectacle mean? That grief wasn't just mourned. It was displayed. A funeral without plumes was plain. A funeral with them? A performance no one could ignore. And presiding over it all is the Undertaker. He does not sweat in the workshop. He does not smell of hay or varnish. He is the still point in the storm. Top hat polished, gloves immaculate, shoes reflecting lantern light. He does not labour. He conducts, calm, composed, authoritative. The one figure who never hurries, even as saws shriek, hammers fall, and horses snort around him. The streets fall quiet, then the sound of hooves. Iron shoes strike wet stone. Wheels click over seams in the cobbles. Coal smoke hangs low. Crushed flowers sweeten the air. A church bell counts the steps. The hearse appears first. Black wood, glass panels. Lantern light sliding like water across its surface. Inside, the casket lies among wreaths, turning the carriage into a solemn stage. Ribbons tremble with each bump in the road, like cues in a play. Constables walk ahead. Carters pull to the side. Omnibuses halt. A thin lane opens like a curtain. Behind it roll the carriages. A single hired cab means the family is scraping by. A string of matched coaches means money and reach. Liveried drivers sit rigid, gloved hands still. The line stretches long, depending on wealth and ambition. The longer the line, the louder the verdict. The poor might manage a single carriage. The wealthy could command a parade so long it clogged entire streets. For some, grief was survival. For others, a declaration of power. Crowds gather at corners. Clerks step out of counting rooms. Washerwomen pause with wet hands. Street vendors lift lids and let steam drift into the air. Children climb crates to see. Hats come off. Whispers ripple. Who was he? How much did this cost? Look at the plumes. Count them. Spectators knew the code. The number of plumes. The polish of the hearse. The spacing of carriages. All signals. Grief was a language, legible to any Londoner who cared to look. And if you knew how to read it, you'd know exactly how much the family paid. Hired mutes walk with lowered eyes. Pallbearers match their steps to the wheels. No one speaks above a hush. Even gossip finds a softer voice. And the weather plays its part. Rain darkens feathers and slows the pace. Summer dust coats the glass. In winter, breath, clouds and lanterns smear the fog. A merchant's parade can feel endless. Windows fill with faces. Names are memorized. Neighbours watch from behind lace curtains, their judgment as sharp as any epitaph. The Undertaker walks near the front, not leading, not lagging. His hat a little taller, his coat tailored to perfection, his gloved hands resting calm. He does not smile, he does not weep. His stillness is his authority. He watches the spacing, counts the beats between hooves and bell, keeps the reflection in the hearse glass symmetrical. Every detail rehearsed, without rehearsal. And the route is chosen with care. Past the family's church, along main streets where rivals will see, never down back lanes unless the purse demands it. This is not travel. It is a message, grief made legible to strangers. The Victorians had a rule for everything, even grief. We've got one rule here. If you're still watching, subscribe. But make no mistake, this was business. Death in Victorian London fed an entire marketplace. Every stage of grief had its supplier. Every ritual, its price tag. Widows draped head to toe in crepes so black it seemed to swallow the light. Etiquette manuals dictated 2 years for a husband, 6 months for a parent, 3 for a sibling. The rules were written down and watched. Jet beads knotted into chokers, bracelets, rings, lockets with tiny compartments ready to hold a curl of hair. For men, black armbands, cravats, cufflinks edged in enamel. Even children wore miniature gloves or ribbons tied in black. Whole streets became mourning districts. Shops draped in black fabric rented suits, sold veils, commissioned entire wardrobes of sorrow. Mourning attire wasn't just custom, it was industry. And the rituals extended into the home. Mirrors covered so no mourner might stumble into vanity. Clocks stopped at the hour of death, their silence marking fracture. Stationers thrived on black-edged cards. Loss spread through the post with solemn dignity. Even the dead themselves became part of the trade. Photographers staged them as though sleeping or standing among family. Macabre to the modern eyes, yet cherished by grieving families in Victorian times. One last portrait in a world where photographs were rare. The Undertaker did not provide it all himself, but he connected the dots. Florists, drapers, printers, stonemasons, photographers. To hire him wasn't just to bury the dead, it was to buy access to a network, a choreography of grief. Grief became an industry, and the Undertaker stood at its centre. And industries don't just feed on sorrow, they thrive on it. Whole trades rose and fell on sorrow. Photographers charging fortunes, florists emptying greenhouses, printers flooding the streets with black-edged cards. Victorians turned grief into profit, and around here, profit looks like one thing, keeping you watching, so don't wander off yet. The Undertaker's true power wasn't in wood or horses, it was in silence. He didn't need to haggle or persuade. He laid out the options and waited. Grief did the rest. A widow would weep, torn between cost and memory. The Undertaker would pause, head bowed, hands still. In that pause, her mind leapt. The finest coffin, the longest procession. Anything less felt dishonour. Middle-class families, anxious to appear wealthier than they were, stretched themselves thin. Extra carriages, plumes for every horse, wreaths stacked high enough to block windows. Debt was the price of dignity. Stories spread of families ruined this way. One widow pawned her husband's watch to pay for feathers, weeping as they nodded above the hearse. Another borrowed so heavily for a grand cortege that her children lived under debt long after the last mourner went home. The Undertaker understood the psychology. Sorrow loosened purse strings. Shame tightened them again. He guided families into that narrow space between the two. But it wasn't only about money. It was choreography. Horses had to arrive in step, the coffin borne at a measured pace. Never rushed, never faltering. Church bells timed so precisely the toll seemed to match each hoofbeat. A flawless funeral left no awkward gaps, no faltering steps, no unsightly mistakes. It was rehearsal without rehearsal, a production with no second chance. And when it worked, the effect was staggering. A grieving family left believing their loss had been dignified, even elevated. The city murmured at the perfection of the display. The Undertaker's name, unspoken, grew stronger with every performance. This was theatre at its highest stakes. The audience, the family clutching handkerchiefs, and the city watching from the curb. In Victorian London, failing to mourn properly was not a private lapse. It was a public disgrace. A family that turned out in faded black, or with no carriage at all, was judged harshly. Clerks whispered in offices. Neighbours leaned over fences. Even casual acquaintances muttered. Unfeeling, careless, poor. Reputation could be shredded not by scandal, but by the cut of a veil or the absence of a carriage. Whispers travelled faster than funerals. A shopkeeper might lose customers if his wife was seen in half mourning too soon. A clerk could be passed over for promotion if his family's funeral looked cheap. Even children weren't spared. Classmates whispered if their father's cortege looked too plain. Respectability hung not only on how one lived, but on how one buried. So, even the desperate paid. Mothers pawned wedding rings to buy a veil. Fathers signed away wages not yet earned for brass-handled coffins. Children walked to school in patched shoes while parents saved for ostrich plumes. Some cut meals to pay florists. Others took in boarders just to afford a single carriage. Families who could barely afford bread still felt compelled to dress grief in velvet. And still it was often not enough. Families hired professional mourners to swell the crowd. They borrowed clothes to look the part. They begged undertakers for credit, hoping to repay before shame caught them. There were stories of men borrowing black coats from neighbours just to stand respectably at their own father's graveside. Meanwhile, the wealthy treated death like opera. Ostrich plumes crowned every horse. Carriages rolled in endless chains, blocking traffic for blocks. Coffins lined with silk, polished until they shone like mirrors. Cemeteries filled with mausoleums so grand they looked like miniature palaces. Even epitaphs grew competitive, sprawling verses carved as if they were resumes for eternity. The irony was bitter. Debt from funerals didn't always end with the grave. Children inherited it, paying for displays they never chose. Grief passed down as ledger entries, long after the flowers rotted. Londoners still whispered about the coal merchant's funeral in 1863. 12 carriages, plumes on every horse. Wreaths stacked so high the hearse windows vanished. The cost ruined his family. Within a year, they were begging for coins on the very streets their procession had once blocked. If one funeral could ruin a family, imagine the pressure every undertaker carried. Death, which spared no one, became another arena for rivalry. Even the grave itself, a stage for class distinction. And the undertaker sold protection, not just coffins or flowers, but dignity, the assurance that sorrow would never slip out of costume. When the last carriage rolled home and the showroom lamps dimmed, the undertaker removed his gloves with slow precision. He polished his tall black hat until it caught the firelight. Then he opened his ledgers. Names of the dead, written neatly in ink. Payments of the living, balanced against them. Grief reduced to numbers. Loss translated into ledgers. And outside, the cemeteries swelled. Rows of obelisks pierced the fog. Stone angels bowed their soot-streaked faces. Marble lambs wept at the feet of children's graves. Ivy curled around cracked monuments, as though even nature bowed in mourning. Epitaphs told their own truths, some short and spare, beloved son, fading in shallow grooves. Others sprawling, pages of stone rehearsing virtues like resumes for eternity. Every line another attempt to outdo the neighbours, even in death. Each monument told two stories, the life it marked and the undertaker who staged its end. Walk through those graveyards today and you still see it, a competition frozen in stone. Some headstones lean, names sinking into moss. Others tower, carved so richly they look like ledgers for the afterlife. Even in silence, the class war lingers. The Undertaker made it possible. He was not a priest, though he dealt in eternity. Not a mourner, though he lived among sorrow. Not profiteer alone, though profit passed constantly through his hands. He was something subtler, the custodian of appearances in a city where appearances meant everything. He sold order against chaos, dignity against disgrace, a performance against the abyss. And in that role, he thrived. Because death never took a day off. Neither did the Undertaker. Funerals in Victorian London could make you famous, but the Undertaker's fame was silence, power in shadows, never carved in stone. And behind that silence, one truth never changed. They still made him rich. Death never took a day off in Victorian London. Neither did the Undertaker. And if you want proof that history's shadows still have plenty to reveal, subscribe. That way, the next video isn't one you'll miss.